And so now I'm very much looking forward to inviting our Vice President of Government and External Affairs, Drew Jacoby Lemos, to the stage to moderate the next panel. And it's one I'm really looking forward to, which is supporting the pilot workforce from dream of flight to an appropriately timed retirement flight. And joining Drew will be Captain Billy Nolan, who's a former acting administrator of the FAA and now Chief Safety Officer at Archer. And he gave me a tour of Archer's aircraft, by the way, midnight, which was just thrilling. It's beautiful. And Sharon DeVivo will join us. Sharon is a true visionary when it comes to connecting and supporting young people from all walks of life as president and CEO of On College and as chair of the FAA's Youth Access to Aviation Jobs in America Task Force. Yvette Rose, also a task force member, is Senior Vice President at the Cargo Airline Association, and she also serves as President of the Aero Club Foundation, where I was pleased to work alongside her for a little bit, and I was able to see how she makes connections right here with Washington, D.C. area kids. Also with us today are Captain Dev Collins, a recently retired Part 121 airline captain who is also a Marine. He's been an active participant and board member of the Let Experienced Pilots Fly Coalition, strong allies of ours on age 67. And I'd like to point out that we have one of our very own former RAA scholarship winners here with us today with a very exciting update. Leona Sorrell is making plans and raising funds to fly around the world, which coincidentally was accomplished first by another panelist, Captain Barrington Irving, 16 years ago. He was the first African American to fly solo around the world. I'm sure Barrington has many stories to share about his 97-day journey and plenty of advice to give Leona, and we've heard a little preview of that yesterday with Barrington's keynote. Today we want to bring all of that experience together to look at the pilot profession, which has been difficult for new pilots to enter and feel supported in even before the pandemic. But before we start, I would like to invite Leona to come up to the stage to give us just a couple of minutes of an overview of her big project and all that's involved. Leona, will you come and join me?
Hello. Hi, my name is Leona Sorrell, and as Faye mentioned, I have the goal to become the first Black woman to fly solo around the world. I was a scholarship winner back in 2020, and RAA did give me the opportunity to first finish my private pilot license, and they made it happen. Thank you so much, Faye. Thank you, RAA. So as of right now, I'm raising funds, and I will be working with the Flying Classroom, who have been highly experienced around the world. They usually travel around the world, and Irvin Barrington, who's my mentor here, and we're gonna be working together and make it happen, and I believe in it.
Accomplished for such a young person already. So it's incredible to me, and I really admire that you've set your goal for this. But if we wanted to find out more information about that, or if somebody wanted to, for example, donate to help Leona make that happen, what's your website?
It's flynona.com.
Flynona,
Flynona,
so FLYNONA.com. And they can find out a little bit more about you, about what you're trying to do, and help support you along the way.
Exactly.
Okay, well, wonderful remarks. And now will the rest of the panel please join Leona and join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
like Faye said, we are expecting Ranking Member Ted Cruz to be with us shortly. So we're going to get started, and then when he arrives, we'll pause. He'll make some remarks. He's very graciously given us some time, and then after his remarks, we'll resume and continue with what I think is going to be an incredible discussion. We're very fortunate to have such a esteemed panel with such a wide variety of perspectives and who've consistently demonstrated leadership on the very topic that we're discussing this morning. So as Faye said, fundamentally what this panel is seeking to tackle is, what does the industry and also the government need to do to support the pilot workforce long term? What's working well today, and frankly, what needs to be worked on? So we'll start with a question for everyone. From your perspective, as it relates to the pilot development pipeline and career path, what's working well, and what can we improve on? So we'll just start with Barrington, and we'll go down the line.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think what's working well is we're getting more folks involved within aviation. There are certainly a lot more organizations stepping up, getting involved. Private individuals who say, hey, I might not have a lot of structure behind me, but I'm going to share my story. I think that's very important with what's taking place in aviation. But I think part of what needs some enhancement is the practical explanation of the pipeline and the pathways, meaning how do I practically do this? I think aviation, of course, to a lot of people, it can be intimidating. Not that there isn't interest, it's where do I start? Where do I go? And I think that's one suggestion I would have.
Yeah, good morning. And just to build on what Barrington was saying, I am seeing much more industry recognition about what it takes to get through the pipeline. That would not have been necessarily what I would have said 5 years ago. So I'm very appreciative for that, especially in terms of funding and understanding the financial burdens that under-resourced individuals and families have to go through in order to become pilots and have this transformational life experience. Absolutely where I think we need to do better is in talking to each other. Yvette and I were fortunate to serve on an FAA panel that looked at, how do we bring more under-resourced, underrepresented individuals to aviation? And that was one of the biggest ones. There are awesome programs going on across this country, and we're all doing our own thing, right? How much better would it be if we were talking to each other?
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to RAA for the invitation. As Faye mentioned, my work has focused with the Aero Club Foundation of Washington, a nonprofit organization focused on advancing the career of aviation through District of Columbia public and public charter schools, supporting educational programs, a very rich scholarship program, which we have seen makes a difference. So in terms of your question and building upon what Barrington said, and Barrington, I've been using this quote for a while. I've heard you say this. In aviation, it's not a recruitment problem necessarily, it's a marketing problem. And I believe that there's the vast careers in aviation that I don't think we do a very good job of explaining what those are to young people interested, with a multitude of skills. I think we limit ourselves sometimes with the STEM curriculums, but in terms of if you're just looking at the pilot profession, which is what this panel is focused on today, I don't think we have a marketing problem. Everybody knows what a pilot is. I mean, the general population, I want to become a pilot, but building upon it's those pathways. There's so many different ways to get there. It's not clear. We focused a lot on that in the Youth in Aviation Task Force recommendation report. Can we just, be better about explaining what the pathways are, and not to mention the financial burden? So those were kind of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll add on what she said. I did general aviation, so as far as we understand what a pilot is, but they don't really explain how it goes, and also the financial burden is something. They'll tell you get your license, but also they don't really go deep. You'll think it's one license, but it is a lot to get. It's really you start from your private instrument commercial, then multi add-on, and it is costly, but that's what it is. Like that's what being a pilot is.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the invitation this morning, Faye, to be here. Having traveled around the world and having lived and worked in both Australia and Canada, as well as having a long time career here in the U.S. at American Airlines, and having had the honor of leading the FAA for the last 15 plus months before moving back to industry. I think, to Faye's point and to others, it's the opportunity for us to have this really national conversation about what, from a strategic standpoint for the United States, in terms of what we think. We all understand what it means to go out and grow the next crop, of doctors, of primary care professionals, and other critical people who are critical not only to our economy, but you just look at the projections, and it goes without saying the need is there. We are seeing the industry, and certainly the folks in this room, who are doing more to the point about defining the pathways, but it's also about eliminating the barriers, right? I mean, our ability to eliminate the barriers, whether it be the barriers of the high financial burden. I'm a benefit of the taxpayers by having a military pilot education, and I'm very, very grateful to the country and to the nation for that. But not everyone has that opportunity. And the biggest challenge for a young person, whether he or she is passionate about it, you get through secondary school and into university, or you go to the military, whatever route you take, and you may be staring down 150, 250, nearly $250,000 by the time it's all said and done to get you to the level of having ATP. So our ability, maybe, and we'll talk more about it this morning, is to reduce those barriers and having ways of offering incentives. I love what Congressman Cohen had to say this morning, right? So those are some real opportunities for us as we think about it this morning.
Wow, am I going to have something to say after all that good knowledge? My name's Dev Collin, and I started out as a Marine. I was a Marine for 30 years, and I was also a commercial airline pilot for 30 years. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum, and I think it's really important to demystify a lot of these obstacles. From my perspective as a military officer, recruitment and motivation is just what it's really all about. Our nation needs capable people in the military. Our nation needs capable pilots and aviators, and it's work getting them. And for too long, we've been ignoring a lot of people that are capable and a lot of people that can cross the bridge to Pilot Island. But it also needs to be talked about, and mentorship and a clear explanation that the path is arduous. Certainly to becoming a Marine, and certainly to becoming a pilot. It's a good challenge, it's a possible challenge, and so we have to do a better job of motivating people, inspiring people to invest that effort, whether it be financial or academic, scholarship, learning to become a leader, which is part of the job.
Well, those were all great responses. So the panel is called From Dream of Flight to Retirement Flight. So given that prompt, let's start. It started at the beginning there with how we approach attracting the next generation to aviation, and specifically pilots. But I think when you're starting out, you're really focused on just lighting that spark and steering them towards aviation. So let's start with Barrington, and then again, we're going to go down the line. So what's your take on the pilot profession specifically? And then how do we excite the next generation to pursue this career, especially those who aren't well represented in it today?
Well, being a pilot there's still this level of glamour and respect and appreciation for it. However, it's a difficult job, and it's a unique lifestyle. And I think it's important that we're very upfront about that because it's like, for example, we'll help students, attract them to wanting to pursue a career, let's say as an FBO worker, right? And they see private jets, or they want to be around private jets, but the reality is, hey, you're gonna have to work on some really hot days and some really cold days and be out there on the ramp. So I think we have to paint a realistic picture around it. But of course, the career is worthwhile. I think part of what we have to understand in aviation is before we jump to how many individuals we need to fill these jobs and so forth, aviation needs to first build a culture before we can start saying, okay, this is a return on investment and taking metrics. We really need to build a culture. And one of the things I've watched over the years is look what some very smart people did to bring to life the concept of coding. Have we paid attention to that? Very subliminal. But how do you take something so complex to understand, and they made it accessible to where anyone can code? You have moms who code, dads who code, like everyone could code. What they understood is a basic fundamental of building a culture around something first, and then diving into it to recruit from that pool. And I think aviation needs to really focus more, what is the culture? What is our identity in society? And then you build demand and recruit from that.
So to piggyback on what you just said, you talked about making the field, the career accessible. Can you talk a little bit about your flying classroom concept? Because that seems to connect right to it.
Yeah, so, look, before we can say, hey, you're capable of being a pilot, a technician, whatever the case may be, what I started to realize and what our company wanted to do under Flying Classroom is how do you actually empower people to believe that they can actually pursue these careers? And if I know, there's a saying, if you see it, you can be it, but also we want to focus on if you can simulate certain experiences that focuses on core fundamentals within the field, you're actually empowering an individual to believe they can pursue this career. So we focus on creating content that, yes, generally ties back to the academic classroom and what students want to learn, but it's aviation-based, and at the same time, they're doing empowering things, whether it's building an airplane or completing hands-on modules. And that's been a big win for us throughout the country, because we're not saying, oh, do you want to become a pilot? It's like, no, it's, hey, would you like to possibly fly around the world, see different places, experience different weather conditions, whatever the case may be? It's all in the sale, it's all in the pitch and the marketing.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I'm going to jump so Yvette, turn to you as the leader of the Aero Club Foundation. And the foundation, of course, supports education programs in DC and public schools, aviation programs. Can you share how the foundation is working with these students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Barrington, you definitely have the lock on, and I've learned so much from watching him and really reach out to students across this country, across the world, really. And I know you talked about yesterday, we got to start younger. High school's too late. So at the Aero Club Foundation, and I see our next speakers here, so I'll try to be brief here. It's really important that we start young and do that inspirational work to be able to show kids that not only to see it, you got to see it to be it, but to really find out what the skill sets are, because it is vast. There's a lot of creative talent, casting a wider net. And Faye, I'm happy to pause here. Oh, okay. But the really important part is about the culture, and the way I think about it also is that, in aviation, we're used to systems and system safety approach. So we do need to take a hard look at ourselves and say, do we have the right systems in place to allow for underrepresented, and that's just not race, gender, it's geographic, it's rural, it's urban, it's socioeconomic backgrounds. To have that diversity of thought in aviation is so critically important, not just because of the numbers and not just because we need to make those workforce demands, but because it's the right thing to do for safety. So that's sort of been a mantra of mine as well. So I'm happy to talk more about how we inspire kids, because those experiences that you talk about is so critically important. We work really hard and we have great sponsors to be able to get a young person on an airplane we can assume that everyone's flown on an airplane, people. There are many people in this country that have, by the time they're even in high school, have never flown on an airplane, have never been to an airport. So that's the kind of population that we focus on, and that is life-changing. I have seen their eyes get all wide-eyed and say, oh my gosh, this is an incredible experience, and I want to be a part of it. So I'll hopefully end on that note and cede time.
All right, everybody, we're going to pause. So we'll pick it back up where we left off, focusing on how we get young people in the pipeline, get them attracted to a career in aviation, and hopefully can encourage enough of them to become pilots. So we are going to go to Sharon now with Vaughn College. So Vaughn College, it's very, very notable in its ability to impact the social mobility of its students. And having an incredibly racially and economically diverse student body. So just share with us your insights, like how are you able to do it when so many other programs struggle in these particular spaces? That'd be great.
Yeah, so Vaughn College is located right across the street from LaGuardia Airport, and Queens is the most diverse county in the country. 144 languages spoken. We serve a largely first-generation college student and first-generation American, which is really exciting. And often their first time on an airplane is when they came to the United States. So it's always fun to hear those stories. And also come with lots of financial challenges. About 80% from a diverse background, and average family income's about $40,000. So you can imagine, even to get an airframe and power plant license, that can be a challenge. Thankfully, the federal government has a program called Pell. New York State also has a program called TAP, Tuition Assistance Program. Both of those things together help incredibly, but it doesn't fill all the gap. And our single largest issues for students not persisting is finances. I have not seen it quite as bad as I've seen it this fall, to be honest. It's better during COVID. I think inflation is really having an impact on students and families. Rent, it's high in New York, but it's really gotten high everywhere. Gas is $4 a gallon, food prices have gone up, and had a few students and families say to me, I just can't swing it, right? And it is a hard case to make to say, yeah, but you'll be able to afford the debt. Right? And first-generation families in particular, immigrant families don't like debt. That's another thing to keep in mind. They are very debt averse, also very entrepreneurial, right? So absolutely, I have students, I don't know how they sleep, working 30 hours, 40 hours a week, going to class, and flying for our pilot students. So that cost of attendance is really, really critical. And it can't just be the federal government. Pell and TAP, unless we magically double Pell, which I don't think is going to happen, we're going to need support from other places. Now, I'm deeply appreciative of the efforts that I'm seeing. On my way to Oshkosh into July, you're probably in the room, I won't mention the airline, $100,000 sign-on bonuses from a regional, which is terrific. We tell students somewhere between $70,000 to $80,000 on top of the cost of tuition to get all the way to your CFII. And we're also seeing the pilot examiner issues and those kinds of things. But cost is the biggest. Awareness is the other piece. Those two things go hand in hand, but cost is really what does it. And where we've seen some changes in recent years is around you being on campus and being in the classroom. So you're signing people on to start accruing seniority, speaking to students in classrooms, having your young pilots come recruit our young pilots, right? So we have Vaughn grads who'll come recruit Vaughn grads, which is perfect, right? Because they see someone who had the same circumstances as them who's making it, right? So all of those, your relationship with technical colleges, flight schools, minority serving institutions like Vaughn is really key to solving the finance issue.
Perfect. So Leona, as a young person, well, younger than all of us up here, and someone who's who is in that professional pilot career path, what's your perspective on the barriers And what have the barriers been for you and for your peers?
Okay, just like she mentioned, I was the one who was going to school, going to fly, and going to work. To be able to balance it, it was actually extremely hard. And I also had a lot of gaps between my training due to financial situation, and that was pretty hard. That was my experience. And whenever I had weather delays, I had to work 3 times harder to be able to pay it back, because I didn't want to ask my family, and I didn't want to fail my check ride. So weather delay was also something big on that, and it's going to cost you more the more you wait. And also the examiners, we have a shortage, so you have a long wait time, a long wait period to wait for the examiner to take you to test you. And if you fail one time, you have to wait even more. And you have like a 2 months period. And if you don't get the exam date, you have to restart the check ride from the beginning. And that was one of the challenges that I faced.
Yeah, we're seeing at least 2 months to wait
at
to
least
test.
2 months.
And that costs you more because you have to stay current.
Yes, you have
right?
to stay current. You have to stay proficient, actually, being safe to fly. And the more you fly, the better you become, actually. And this is what I faced. I had to fly a lot to keep myself proficient and wait for the check ride date while I had some weather. It was very challenging.
Yeah. And I think open it up here to anybody else who wants to chime in on the specific challenges in this space, what they think the remedies could be specifically.
Well, let me say a couple of things. I want to go back to Barrington's comments, right? So one of the first things we just must do as part of, in terms of how we relate to young people, is let's not minimize the arduousness of the path, right? Both Dev and I are, again, we're the benefits of our nation's military and that training. But you know, like a doctor, like a lawyer, you're talking about years and years of postgraduate education to acquire that requisite level of experience. You think about what it takes, so having that, so that level of grit, you know, being able to communicate that this is not, it can be a very lucrative career, and it is. You know, Rand did a study a few years ago when I was working on an issue when I was at Airlines for America, and they estimated that if you took a pilot who was a military pilot and they did 10 years of their military service, he was using the Air Force as an example, and went on to do, you know, 25, 30 years with an airline, that their lifetime earnings were somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 to $14 million. So we are talking about a career path that will indeed reward you well. The early days of it, and all of us on this panel who are pilots have been through it, right? It requires, you've just got to be able to stick to it. It's not the only career there, right? I mean, there are A&P mechanics, there are others. You know, we've seen, look at the explosion of our ecosystem. We've got electric air taxis coming on board. I'm at a company that is, you know, that's what our future product will be, right? So there are lots of pathways. It is about, you know, spurring that passion for it. Mine started making paper airplanes growing up in Alabama, right? And then got the love for it, and it just stuck with me to this day. And I was blessed to be able to go on. And it is instilling that. It is having, you know, passionate mentors like Barrington and others, right, that inspire us to say we can do it. And that's what we have to give. But let's not, you know, you can inspire, but we also can inform as well in terms of just what it's going to take. But going back to the earlier point, right, I do think there's an opportunity. And we could think about things, you know, doctors, for example, at least, you know, in the past could join the National Health Service, so they had some loan forgiveness in exchange for public service. Are there avenues where we could have something like that that allows, you know, students to set aside part of that? Don't know, but this is a national conversation, so it's a good time to have those kind of things. So I think, I mean, there's a lot more things that we could think about, and certainly, you know, as Senator Cruz spoke to, right, loan guarantees, other impediments, FAA producing more designated pilot examiners, figuring out how we go make that happen. Certainly my role when I sat in the administrator's chair was how to eliminate barriers to moving forward, right? And we just got to continue to have that conversation and that kind of action.
I think also what I'm hearing and what I was going to say at some point we need to explore efficiencies. Not just access, not just, we need to explore efficiencies with our system. Our system is a complex system, and as business people, industry leaders, and pilots, it's hugely important to be adaptive and capture the revenue, the experience, whatever you need out of that system through efficiencies. And we do have a system that we can really focus and gain some of these goals that we're trying to achieve through better efficiencies of training and things like that. With regard to the ATP, the all mystifying ATP that everyone aspires to get, what does it mean? And why do I want to achieve that? Just becoming a pilot's one thing, but getting that ATP, which is the Airline Transportation Pilot Certificate, the highest one you can obtain, allowing you to do just about anything in aviation, whether it's commercial or private. What does that mean? And it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be opened up, and we need to find the efficiencies in that program so that people can get to where they need to go better.
Clearly we have a long-term need for more pilots, and filling that need starts with outreach and education at a very young age. But with the pilot shortage, there's also a very prevalent and dire short-term need. We have the issuance of ATPs has been way up last year. This year looks like it's going to be slightly higher or in line with the previous years. But as Jeff from Oliver Wyman shared yesterday, there's certificates that come behind that on your way towards getting an ATP don't suggest that we can count on such elevated levels for the future. So when it comes to the pilot shortage, we have to be focused on those short-term solutions, especially since the pilot shortage is having such a devastating impact on air service to so many small communities across the country. Hundreds and hundreds have less service than they did pre-pandemic. So Dev, of course, you're a member of the Let Experienced Pilots Fly Coalition. Can you talk a bit more about what you guys are working on to advance the short-term solution? How's it going? And why do you think this is the right solution for the workforce?
Right. During the 2 days of this conference, it's just come up and up again. We need a short-term solution to solve these staffing issues. And there's also an issue that's really important to understand that we were going to talk about, and we'll all talk about in this panel, is experience. And what does that really mean? Experience for itself isn't anything unless you can communicate that experience, unless you can act with ethical and moral authority using that experience. And it's really important to develop people, and pilots especially, to be empowered with that experience. It takes time, obviously, not to be a master of the obvious. But in my story, I just joined the Marine Corps to do pull-ups and drink beer. I didn't know I was going to be an aviator. And by a fate of good fortune and timing and strong upper body strength, I got there. And it allowed me, they said I was going to be an aviator, and I'm sure you have a similar story as an Army aviator. You don't have a lot of choices, but I will tell you this about experience and what we're trying to accomplish with our group. We operate in a world, you operate in a world, and Barrington operates in a world where we can't fail. I was taught as a Marine I cannot fail in the battle space. It's unacceptable. It will not be tolerated. I cannot fail. I have to come aboard the ship every single time. During the day, during the night, I've got to be able to do that. It translated very well to a world of aviation where I have to have plan A, B, C, D, E, and F. You and the Regional Airline community have to have those plans too, because it's a very dynamic environment. And we have to create people and make these fields accessible to people that are willing to take that challenge. That challenge of a 99.99% success rate. And how do you do that? You do that through experience. You do it by empowering people to be mentors. You teach them to go out and find these people and train them and show them by the numbers over and over and over again. Before I landed on an aircraft carrier, I landed on the ground 1,000 times the same way, slamming into it catching that 3-wire over and over again. And once I demonstrated that I could do that, and you did it with helicopters on board, and small LZs and things like that, challenging approaches, then you go out. In the past, with regard to efficiencies, we used to go out in a 727 or a 737 and drone around the pattern in this big commercial airliner. And we've developed efficiencies and we've developed better trading techniques to now allow us to fly our first revenue trip without ever flying the airplane before as a new student, theoretically, with an ATP. So my group realizes that in great numbers, we need relief. That vast experience is leaving. And we're trying to build a program that brings more people to it with this capability. It requires mentorship. It requires this glue. Our experience is the glue that holds together our safety culture and our operational culture. You know, during COVID, no one talks about it, but for 2 years, the world stopped. I mean, you'd think the planet's rotation physically stopped. And I'd never in my career had flown to more diverse and challenging places ever. I show up, I'm going to Tahiti one day, and I'm going to Chengdu the next. And you think, oh, wow, that's a great deal. Well, nothing was happening. Nobody was there when we got there. There was no support for the airplanes. There was no support in ATC. You'd get on an airplane on the West Coast and fly to Europe and speak to 3 people. There'd be no one else in the sky. It's really bizarre. I'd be in the museum standing in front of sunflowers with no one else to look at Van Gogh's painting. Nobody was around. But the way we got through that as an industry and as the pilot group was through experience and training and desire, this desire to do great things. And so specific to raising the age, we're all individuals. We all have certain different capabilities. It shouldn't be defined by a number. And a quick-term solution, a tourniquet to the operational problems we're having and the death by 1,000 paper cuts we're having is to take all these people that are just being forced to retire and allow them to continue to mentor and share their experience with all these new, young, great people coming up. We need to inspire them.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I'm going to use that to pivot to Billy because, of course, Billy, incredible experience as a commercial airline pilot. You've had numerous roles in a variety of organizations, and of course, the last one being acting administrator at the FAA. And of course, you originated the FAA's call to action in response to the near misses and troubling risks that you were seeing in the system. So can you talk a little bit about how mentorship and passing on the professionalism contributes to the robust safety culture that we need to help us get out of these challenging times?
Yeah, thank you. If we think about, again, to Dev's point, where we've been over the last couple of years as we come out the backside of the pandemic, I'd argue that, the federal government is probably, are they back to full 100%? Do we have the efficiencies? One of the things I tried to spark in the FAA workforce during my time as its head is saying, ensuring that the things that we think we're doing, we're getting the same sort of grade from you, the industry, right? So if we believe that we're delivering on the number of certificates, we're delivering on the number of DPs, we're delivering on the number of whatever the metric is, that we are indeed delivering, right? So when I think about that, now, I've been involved, been a pilot for 43 years. I've been in safety and operational excellence for 39 of that 43 years. So I've seen a lot in terms of aviation safety. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, looking across having worked at 3 of the world's major airlines in 3 different countries. So what I can tell you that as we've come out of that, when we think about, to Dev's point, when we think about professionalism, we think about training, we think about experience, we've come a long way. When I think about where we are in terms of simulation, we'll talk about it on a different panel later this morning, but we've come so far, that ability to be able to put a pilot through his or her paces. I've been a training captain myself, both at the airlines and both in the military. And so I understand that need to say, to Dev's point, what might you encounter? sitting at the FAA, you get a chance to look at it all. I used to get a morning daily administrators report that told me the number of unruly passengers to the number of incidents and accidents across every sector of the aviation ecosystem, right? So you get a chance to see all that, and you see happen, and you can see times where you see a spike in the number of general aviation accidents, much of which, as we saw that, as we come out of the backside and realize that maybe there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of rust to dust off our muscle memory, our mental memory as we return to the flight deck, right? And thus our call to action. Now, for those that were there, and Faye was there and on the panel, all right, to put it in context, every day we fly in the U.S. alone 45 to 50,000 commercial airline flights, right? We are incredibly safe. But it was enough for us to say, even to have 7 or 8 very close calls, that let's pause and take a look and to see if there anything that we are missing collectively from a regulatory perspective, from an industry perspective. In this room, let's face it, you have a lot of the newer end of the spectrum as folks are coming in or starting off with regional and moving, but you've also got some super experienced people, right? So that call was collectively, let's just make sure we've left nothing on the table with respect to what we're doing. The FAA last year penned a advisory circular on flight path management. It is really that what we think about as piloting 101, coming back to knowing where we are at any given place in time. The old pilot adages, where am I going, and how do I get there? But the same could be argued about this whole, approach to this career path, right, from education to retirement in terms of how we incentivize. It's the same thing, laying out a pretty defined pathway for young folks that says, do you really want to be a pilot? Is that something, or you want to be something else in the aviation ecosystem? And really understanding what it takes to get there. And then I think it's our role in the public, in the private, in government, to say, how can we eliminate the barriers or at least lessen the barriers, because this is coming. And it becomes something of a national resource. I look across, and this is a bit of a long soliloquy here, but we've lost, when you look at the amount of essential air services that are lost in many of our cities. This might be something that eVTOLs will be able to replace in the not too distant future. But we are where we are today, and it is incumbent upon all of us working together to find a pathway for it.
So in your remarks just now, one of the things you touched on was the advances in simulation, right, to improve training. So with that, Sharon, you led the Youth in Aviation Task Force, made numerous recommendations with the idea of how do we tackle getting youth in these career paths. And one of those recommendations was increasing the amount of sim time. Of course, with the caveat here, it has to be done safely, has to meet, has to enhance safety, I think was a specific term, right, that could count towards pilot certification. Right. Can you talk a little bit about that recommendation, and I guess specifically what benefits would your students see towards that? Because you're talking about, we talk about this in the environment of a post-flight training, post-141, coming into a regional airline. Your recommendation was for the students in the training program, like at Vaughn, and that's a little bit different. Right. And I'd like to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things is simulation has gotten so good, right? And the opportunity to practice things that we hope you'll never face, right, in the air, and the ability to correct issues that you might be having in an aircraft at a much lower price point. That's a big one, right? You're not paying for Jet A in a simulator. Now, I'm not saying you're sitting in there trying to figure it out by yourself. You've got a certified flight instructor with you. You're actually logging time. We didn't try to touch the number of hours issue. We just talked about how much more efficient, and we've talked a little about efficiency, how much more efficient could your actual flight time be if you were always primed and ready based on experience in the simulator. It just means you don't have to fly that stall issue 12 times. Maybe you practice it 10 times in the simulator, and then you can do it in 1 or 2 shots in the aircraft, and you can move on to the next module. So it was about making your entire training pathway more efficient, more effective, especially around costs, and making you a better pilot, and the ability to practice things like I said, that hopefully you might never see.
I have a question. Do you think young people who are considering a career as a pilot and they're envisioning how they're going to be trained, how they're going to get their skills, do you think they envision that this is what they're going to be, this is what they're going to be doing? Like this is their expectation, and then they come into it and it's like, oh, this isn't quite what I thought. I would have liked to use this technology. And this for Barrington 2 and Leona. Like, does it meet their expectations?
I definitely saw it with the whole, steam gauge versus glass debate, right? Because we had more senior people who were like, steam, right? And the students were like, glass, please glass, right? So the simulators are all glass, and that's the experience they want in the aircraft. So absolutely, I mean, we have great toys, right? Air traffic control simulators, flight simulators. These are things that students get into and go, oh, this is way more technological than I thought it was. So I see it as a great draw for students.
Yeah, and let me jump in on that too. The virtual reality
Yes,
technology
absolutely.
and
On
how young
engines.
people
Yeah.
will respond to that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen some, institutions applying that for the private pilot's license, certainly, and getting approval from the agency for those kinds of things. So technology is definitely something that needs to continue to be looked at as
Yeah.
a way to not only inspire, but to become more efficient.
Yeah, one of the things we're starting to see, so we've been evolving from not just working with, elementary, middle school, or high school, but also adults as they transition into industry. And one of the things we're starting to see quite a bit of after speaking directly with the employers, there's something brewing in our industry I think we have to speak more about, that there's a major difference between an individual having a certificate and an individual being competent. Now, our industry is struggling with that balance. So, for example, with technicians, we'd get employers who say, look, we get it. We know what the FAA requires for them to get their certificate. No problem, they get their certificate. But once they start an industry, can they realistically tell me the difference between a caution, note, or warning in a manual? So what we're seeing is you have employers with very specific needs. And yes, it ties to on-the-job training, but if an employer doesn't really have that internal capacity, how do you upskill an individual once they receive their certificate and they're hired? And we're finding that as a gap that our flying classroom company is now starting to plug and really engage with the employers around. It's going to become more of an issue. Certificates, one thing, competency is another, and the employers have to be very honest and think through what are the intangibles that we truly want these candidates to possess, be trained on, and so forth. It's a real issue.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a critical point, and I think that's a point that's going to get unpacked more in another panel, because that experience is also an experience that we face in the pilot training space, right? Just because you have an ATP doesn't mean that everybody has the same experiences to get that ATP, and that the quality of that training is going to translate to what ultimately, be it business aviation or a regional airline, that candidate's going to have the characteristics that they want right out the door. So being able to essentially give the employers what they want while fulfilling the regulatory requirements is a very important thing. And if you don't, it's a waste of effort and time and money and frustration on both ends.
Add too that it also includes the regulator, right? So it took 50 years to change the Part 147.
Yes. Yeah.
So we need a process that's much quicker, right? And responds to the needs of the industry on a regular basis and works with industry and educators to make sure that that whole ecosystem works really well together.
And of course, now we're going to talk about the letter that Billy co-authored with 8 former FAA administrators and 2 former ALPA presidents that really highlighted the critical role simulators can play for advancing aviation safety. I guess the question is how do we do that? How do we ensure that they are used and are used more? And then additionally, I want to add there, because you're at Archer now, how important is an expanded use of that technology for the future of the AAM community in training this workforce that you have to create?
Yeah, so let me build upon both Sharon's point and Barrington's point, right? Experience absolutely matters, but the quality of the experience matters just as much, if not more, right? So we've talked a lot about what does it mean and what contributes. So we go back to, two old guys on this side of the stadium here, or the platform, and I started out, the early days of simulation was a green screen, right? And then sitting in a 727 simulator, and not even a green screen for the time, and I was in a helicopter simulator. So what we are thinking, how we argue that, because this has come such a long way. Let me give you an example, right? So we don't take pilots in a Part 121 operation and say, I think we'll go do an engine failure with the passengers on board. We don't say, oh, you know what, let's just do a couple more loops around the pattern until you really nail that crosswind landing. We don't do it. We don't go and say, thrust reverser unlock comes open in flight. Those are the things that we don't do. This is the role of how training and its contribution to the level of safety we enjoy. It is a really multifaceted approach to how we got there, along with our safety management system that takes all of these inputs. Right, we've come a long way. You've got evidence-based training. You got AQP. You just got the myriad of alphabet soup in terms of how we train today. So when we think about how do we go forward, you've got the ACT ARC that is still out there and is still stood up, right? So that's a vehicle. And Senator Cruz and both Congressman Cohen talked about the ability to do something through FAA reauthorization. In the end, it's truly about quality. And it has to be, right? I graduated, I graduated Army pilot training with 182 hours. I went on in the course of the next year, at about 600 hours, I was an aircraft commander in Korea flying, soldiers and folks around, lives in the balance, right? And we've come a long way. And certainly by the time I came to the airline, I certainly had in excess of 1,500 hours, right? Thousands of hours by then. My point is this, right? The thing that we love about our nation's military is things like decision-making, things like, ability to have stress, multiple, or cascading failures, as you will, and that ability to deal with those are all the things that we can do with the way and how far simulation technology has come today. Period, full stop, that we will never get to practice because that's not what we expect, and certainly you'll have the FAA administrator knocking on your door, or somebody from the FAA knocking on your door, to the extent you are doing those kinds of things in flight. So it's how we leverage all of the tools that we have as an industry, all the tools that we have via our legislative process, and then all the tools we have on the regulatory side from an FAA perspective to say we can build a modern system of training, of legislative acts that contributes to building America into an unstoppable force. Now, I'm pretty passionate about this, right? Because it's not just America. We're up against the world here, right? And many of them do it totally different. I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, right? But we do have an opportunity when we think about just how fast we're moving. You look at the shortage is real. So let's take a look at this in a very dispassionate, even though my tone is passionate, but let's think about it in a dispassionate way about how we ever leverage every tool that we have to go make this happen.
It's focused discipline training, the quality of the training. So again, to demystify the processes is a big part of it. An ATP, we keep saying these terms, there's many, and it's associated with hours, when in reality it's not really associated with hours in terms of quality. Military pilots can get an ATP after 750 hours. Accredited school, 4-year program, really has to do with credits. It's 1250. And a 2-year association, more credits in aviation courses. It's it's 4 years, 1,000, 1250 for a 2-year. And that's really associated not with time, but with accreditation of the school in terms of how many aviation culture studies you're doing, so to speak. I'm using the wrong terminology. But it's really important, again, to adapt, find the efficiencies in the system. It's a layered approach. We don't do engine cuts for real in the 727 in the pattern, but at some point you have to deal with an engine that's not working. Yeah. And you have to demonstrate that you can do that. You learn to glide in the Cessna 172, you don't learn to glide in a Phantom. But you know how to handle procedures that are stressful and hard. That training comes in a layered approach all along the way. And again, as we said, not everyone wants to be an ATP pilot. We need helicopter pilots flying people in Alaska. We need people flying mail. We need different types of aviators in our culture and in our ecosystem. With the ATP primarily dealing with Part 121 carriers. So we have to recognize that not everyone's going to do that and still have a big part in that culture.
Yeah. So we have time for one more question, and we'll end it the way we started it, and we'll go down the line. So I think we've had a robust discussion where we've touched on a number of ideas for supporting, a safe pilot workforce throughout all career stages of development, and we've identified some of the obstacles as well. So let's close it out with, one piece of advice for the next generation that you can give them to pursuing a career, or one policy item that you think we need to focus on and tackle to make progress on getting more people into the pipeline.
My recommendation to a young person is don't be so caught up in the career, actually learn the industry. There's so many young people who so focus on their job, they have no clue about the industry, then they don't know which way to go, how to make the right decisions. Like, know your industry more than you know your career.
My recommendation is for all of you, go find your local minority serving institution and talk to them about the career path that's available. So many of those institutions are not plugged into aviation or the things that we do, and they would be so excited to talk to you.
My piece of advice is also to the industry. Pick up the Youth and Aviation Task Force recommendation report that Sharon and I were. We have some really actionable, 21 recommendations. We all need to do our part. So I think there's a lot in there about collaborating and empowering. I led trends analysis where we interviewed young people in this industry, and the number one reason why they came to aviation was because they knew a family or friend in aviation. So we need to work to change that statistic.
My recommendation is know the field where you're getting into and actually love it, learn it, and if you want to become a pilot, don't just go there and study to pass the check ride, but actually put some effort and motivation in to be competent in the field. Because I know people who have trained just to pass a check ride, and they're within standards, but their flying is not that great. While I know those who have failed many times, but they're great pilots. So this is basically my advice.
Three quick things. Number one, again, building up on all of this collective comments today, is number one, continuing to inspire America's youth. Number two, this level of collaboration on the legislative front, on the federal, at the FAA and the Department of Transportation front, and within the industry itself. All of us coming together to say, to the point that have been made, that Yvette made, right? We've got lots of language already out there. Let's leverage it, right? Let's come together and let's be willing to say we can leverage the advances in technology and leverage the experience that we have out there, that we can indeed open this pathway and open the aperture wider to be able to meet the demands.
I have two comments. To young people, it's simple. I would tell that young person, and I do all the time as a mentor to people, make a commitment. Make a commitment to this path and do not give up. And that's been the story. Don't let anything stop you. Don't let the financial hardship stop you. Don't let the academics, the scholarship, or the pressure. It is worth it, but it requires an earnest, honest, and deep commitment. And to government and industry, I would say, we have an immediate solution to the ills of staffing and our safety culture. We are letting people with extreme and vast amounts of capability leave. I think that we need to pass this legislation to allow people to fly beyond 65 years old.
Great. All right, join me in thanking our panel for joining us. Well, great.